Hi Willy Thistlers, it's Rachel from Barkland Croft here in Fair Isle, and it's lovely to be back with you again. Thank you so much for all your comments on my previous postcard from Fair Isle in the Woolly Thistle video, and I really appreciated all the questions that you asked me. So that's what we're going to do in today's episode. I'll try and work my way through and answer those questions for you. But first of all, we're in February. Where did January go? How did it go so quickly? Already feels like the year is getting away with me. I don't know about you. So for the first question, I had 4 people who asked fairly similar questions, and let's work through those. So multi-knitter Nancy Knott asked, how many sheep do you have? How difficult do you find it being a shepherdess? Do you ever have to bring in help at certain times? And if so, what might those times be? Then Joanne Lager asked, what's it like farming in the winter when the nights are so long and the days are short? MKROT1 or MKROT1 said, I'd really like to know more about your sheep, your care for them, what feeds you feed them. I'm all about what goes into the sheep to produce such lovely yarn in the end. And Cindy Lee asked, I noticed in the video of your sheep at the end of my last video that it was very cold, windy and very wet where they were at. Do they have a warm place to be at night? And does the ground cause problems for them in the winter with it being cold and wet? Do you have to do anything to protect them? Well, to start off, a little bit about my sheep, for those of you that don't already know. I currently have about 80 sheep in total, which is the maximum amount that I can keep on the amount of land that I have here in Fair Isle. And of those 80, about 3/4 of them are pure Shetlands. So I'll put up a picture here of Piccalilly and Agatha. And then I've got about 20 who are Shetland Texel crossers, or maybe 3/4 Texel, like Shauna in the picture, and Wellington, who's the bigger one, watching Biscuit being clipped. And then I've got one Suffolk called Patchwork.
Well, the main thing they get fed, in addition to their hay and silage, is this, which is, I think it's just called booster nuts. It's basically a barley blend with some added extras in. And then I mix in with that some of this, which is shredded beet. And that's just quite sort of tasty for them. And then some of them, if they're needing a little bit extra or they're needing encouraging to eat, this is a coarse mix. I think they call it crunch. Looks a bit like rabbit food. And that's just a really kind of tasty extra treat that will encourage them to eat, full of lots of yummy things. So that's the 3 main hard feeds that they get, and then they also get either hay or silage, and they get these mineral lick tubs, which I put out and they can access as and when they want, just to help boost their nutrients. I've got some hungry ones in here. They've heard me rattling the feed. You ready for breakfast? You're always ready for breakfast, big girl. That's why you're the size you are.
So this is the forage that the sheep get fed. This is what's called silage here on Fair Isle, but is more probably known as haylage everywhere else. And that's what we make ourselves. We grow the grass in the summer and it gets cut and dried a little bit and then baled and wrapped.
So these are the boys, and as you can see, headphone wire, their fields are really exposed and there's no natural shelter for them. So, against the wind. So they have access to the byre here. Where they can come in and take shelter with the hens. And then they also have bits around here where they can shelter as well, depending on what direction the wind's coming from. So little bits in there, little sections on here. As you can see from all the poop on here, they like to, they actually go up on here, some of them, to sleep, because you can tell by the lack of the wind now, it's a really, really sheltered spot up there. Hi Conker! Hi Fuzzy Felt! Hey Conker!
So these are the yows, and as you can see again, they've got quite an exposed area in which they live. There's no barn or anything for them. However, they do have quite a few little bits which are quite enclosed that they can come into and sort of huddle in together for warmth. And dotted around there's also 2 or 3 of these field shelters, which are sort of panels put up in a cross shape so that they can be sheltered from any direction of wind. And there's also a few stone ruins and old stone shelters as well in the field, so they've got plenty of places they can go to get shelter from the weather conditions. Then the last batch of sheep are these guys. These are the gimmers, which are last year's female lambs, and also a couple of my sort of special needs ones. A Scampy cat in the background. So these guys are just having their breakfast at the moment. They're in what used to be the garage. There's Blossom with her wonky legs and wonky jaw, and yeah, bits of everything in here. Hay, feed storage, straw. So these guys have free access into there. They can come and go as they want. Then they've got this, which is kind of the back garden, and then the other side of those buildings, which is the side garden. So they've got plenty of bits to run around in as well. So the weather here in Fair Isle can be pretty horrid, and winter is especially so, seeing as it feels like it lasts for about 6 months of the year. We get very, very strong winds here in Fair Isle throughout the winter, well, autumn, winter, spring. So today, although you can see by the reflection in my glasses that it's quite sunny outside, we've got winds over 60 miles an hour today, and they're forecast for the next few days to continue like that. And also we had hailstorms this morning while I was out feeding them. So throughout the winter, the ground gets very, very boggy, very muddy, and it doesn't really get a chance to dry out at all. So one of the problems that can cause for the sheep is with their feet, and they can get something called foot rot. And the way we kind of prevent that or take care of that is, if I see a sheep that's limping, the first thing we'll do is give their foot a clean out any mud that's in there, and give it what we call blue spray, which is a spray that we get from the vets. It's called terramycin, and that's kind of like an antibiotic spray, so that will hopefully kill any nastiness that's got inside their feet. If that doesn't work, then we'll probably inject them with something like Alamycin, which again will help combat the spread of any nastiness, the start of any infection there. So foot care is quite a big one through the winter, just keeping an eye on their feet and nipping any sort of lameness in the bud. One of the other things I do in terms of caring for the sheep is that at specific times of the year I will dose them, and that's essentially giving them an oral medicine which will prevent things like liver fluke and worms, which can be very harmful to them internally. And I'll put a little video of me doing that for the boys, which I was doing last week, and it can be a bit tricky to do single-handedly because you've got to hold the sheep, administer the dose, and then try and mark them as well, so you know which ones you've done. So that's why I'm holding the marker crayon in my mouth. Farming through the winter, I'm not going to lie, it can be pretty horrid, and there are days when I absolutely hate it. I don't hate the fact that I have to do it, it's just I hate the weather, I hate wading through 6 inches of mud, I hate that the sheep are having to stand in mud, that there's nowhere kind of dry for them to go. It can be really, really challenging, especially when you're trying to push bales of silage through inches of mud when you've got storm force winds blowing against you. So yeah, it's challenging. I wouldn't say it's nice by any stretch of the imagination. And yeah, you do spend many months longing for, you know, the nice weather of summer, and for wanting the ground to dry up and get solid again. So yeah, that's probably, the weather is definitely the biggest challenge of farming, crofting throughout the winter. How difficult do I find it being a shepherdess? I don't know that it's difficult. I wouldn't say it's difficult. Obviously it's challenging at times. I live on my own, so I do everything by myself. It's more kind of from a time constraint point of view. The length of time it takes me to do things with the sheep then impacts on how much time I have to do things like earn money through working. So it can be difficult in that respect, just trying to juggle everything. And obviously with the long nights and the short days throughout the winter weeks and months, that can have a big impact. So for instance, today, it's normally at the moment, so we're beginning of February, it's light enough to go out and do feeding around about 7:45 in the morning. I think this morning, by the time I'd finished doing the dogs and the cats, it was about 8 o'clock by the time I went out to do the sheep. And I got back inside just before 11 o'clock this morning. So it took me nearly 3 hours. A lot of that was because of the weather conditions and battling against those. But yeah, 3 hours, and that's just to feed 3 lots of sheep with hard feed and then roll out bales of silage, that kind of thing. So then that means by the time I've come inside, got showered and changed, ready to actually start my working day, it's getting on for midday, and then it's dark again by the time it's sort of 4:30. So that window of opportunity to get things done can be really narrow. So some days, if we do get a decent day of weather, I need to spend the whole day outside kind of catching up on jobs that need doing outside, like repairing fencing, ditching, if I need to move sheep, that sort of thing. Do I ever bring help in? The only times really that I need to sort of ask for help is during lambing. If I'm not able to lamb a yow myself, if there's some complications going on, or if I'm not confident enough that I can do it myself, then I'll phone my neighbour Ian, and he'll come down and help me. But other than that, I do everything myself. Apart from things like baling in the summer months, where as an island community we're very limited by the machinery we have. We only have a couple of tractors, there's only one baling machine, there's only one woofler machine which turns the hay over. So then we go around the aisle working from croft to croft as a big sort of team, getting the baling done around the field. So that's I guess that's bringing help in one respect. The next question is from two people that had similar questions. Delma Hockett asked, how cold does it get in winter? And do I sell the wool from my sheep? They also wanted to know, do I get to keep the coat I designed for the Barber Vogue competition? I'm not sure about that yet. We'll have to wait and see. And also a similar question to that was, I think it's Esther Rubin, trying to read my writing, who said, what does she do with the wool from her sheep? So first part of Delma's question, how cold does it get in winter? Because we're such a small island surrounded by sea for many miles in all directions, it's a very kind of maritime climate. I know that sounds an obvious thing to say, but the impact that has on us is that we have a very, very narrow temperature range. So it never gets very cold here, it never gets very hot here. Saying that, obviously the wind chill factor plays a big part, so it often feels very, very much colder than it actually is, if that makes sense. So winter temperatures, it rarely gets below 0, that's degrees C, freezing. It will occasionally go maybe down to at -2, -3 is about the absolute kind of coldest it would be. That, again, degrees C, degrees centigrade. And then in summer, it very, very rarely gets above 15 degrees C, probably 17 degrees C here is the hottest I think it's been in the 7 years that I've been here. And it really does feel like an absolute heat wave then. As for what I do with the wool from my sheep, so the fleeces from my pure Shetlands go out every 2 years to Uist Wool over on the Isle of North Uist in the Western Isles, the Outer Hebrides. And this year was the first year that I actually got my skeins of wool back. And hopefully you can see those. So they're all natural shades. I don't have any dyed skeins. This one is the natural white colour, which is kind of a creamy off-white. And this is called Beecroft Busby. Then I have a pale Moorit colour, which is Beecroft Butterscotch. And finally a grey, I'd probably call that a mid to dark grey, which is the Beecroft Barnacle. And those skeins are for sale. They're 100-gram skeins of DK weight yarn, and they're for sale in my online shop, which is www.b-croft.co.uk, and I'll pop the address just here for you if you want to have a look. My next question is from Eugene Diokno. Apologies if I've pronounced that incorrectly. And they asked about the rainbow sheep sweater, whether there was a pattern and what yarn I used for it. So for those of you who haven't seen it, this is what I call my rainbow sheep jumper or sweater. And it's quite a sort of a boxy design, 3/4 length sleeve, and it has these fun little sheepy buttons on it. This was one that I designed last year, and I haven't written a pattern for it. It's not at the moment available as a hand knitting pattern, but I will be selling the actual garments, the finished garments, in my online shop. But again, it's finding the time to get round to actually doing that and knitting up prototypes in each size, but it will get there eventually, and I will be updating my shop just as soon as I've got that done. So it's not knitted in my own wool from my own sheep, but it is knitted with pure Shetland wool from Jameson's of Shetland, and it's in all these lovely kind of dual rainbow tones. My next question is from Linda Lepek, And she has a question that a lot of people ask when they see pictures of Shetland and Fair Isle. And she says, there's a lack of trees in Shetland. Is that because of the wind? And that's a really good question. Going back thousands of years, Shetland used to be covered in vast forests of trees, although nowadays there are only a few areas where you will see trees growing. Certainly on Fair Isle we have hardly any trees at all, and the very, very few that we do have are very, very small examples, but I'll put a couple of examples in the photos here for you. The first two photos are of what's called plantation, which is at the very end of a kind of winding gully, so it's protected on pretty much 3 sides. And then this second photo shows the solitary pine tree that grows in Gully, which is a very sheltered location. And the reason, certainly on Fair Isle, that trees don't go is, again, because we have such a kind of a maritime climate, so it's very wet, it's very salty from the sea, so things growing get a lot of salt burn, which just kills them right off. So things will grow, trees will grow, but they have to be protected on all sides. So it kind of the as tall as they get is limited by how much protection you can give them, which is why we have very few sort of bushes or trees naturally growing here on the Isle. And my final questions come from Rebecca Bandy, who asked, what made you choose Fair Isle as your home and what is your knitting history? And Alicia Liang, who asked, I'm curious how long she's been a crofter and how she came into her particular craft. So I first came to Fair Isle in 2014 when I came to work for a season at the Fair Isle Bird Observatory as assistant cook, and then moved here permanently the following year, so 2015. And the way that came about was while I worked at the OBS, the cook at the time, she and her family lived in this house that I now live in, and they were leaving Fair Isle. And on my days off, I'd kind of go around the Isle and, you know, go walking and help out if anyone needed a hand with stuff. And as time went on, people started asking, you know, have you thought about applying for Barkland? Have you thought about, you know, taking the croft on? And first off, I kind of thought, oh gosh, you know, couldn't do that. I've no experience of sheep. I've never, you know, done anything remotely related to crofting. But then the more I kind of spoke to people about it, and people assured me that, you know, it's doable, you can learn. Most people moving to Fair Isle nowadays don't have any experience with sheep or crofting. So so that's how that came up. It was really an opportunity came up at the right time, and I took it. As for my knitting history, I knew how, I can't remember where or when I learnt to knit or who taught me, and that's not because, oh, I've been knitting since I was a baby. It's nothing like that. It's simply, I honestly can't remember learning. I don't know whether it was maybe at school or my mum or gran taught me. I just don't remember. So when I came to Fair Isle, I could knit, in that I could cast on, I could knit, I could purl, I could cast off. That was kind of about it, but I wouldn't have ever said I was a knitter. I had an interest in knitting, an interest in textiles, in natural fibres like wool, but I wouldn't have said I was an active knitter, certainly. Then being on Fair Isle, obviously you see all the knitwear around you, and so I started doing a little bit of hand knitting. I made a few keps for friends and family. And then when I moved here permanently, I got trained as a finisher for 2 of the knitwear companies on the Isle. And a finisher is someone who essentially pieces together the different parts of a garment. So when garments are knitted, say a jumper, you would knit a front, a back and 2 sleeves, and then the ribs for the bottom, the wrists and the neck. And then it's the finisher's job to seam and graft all of those together, so you come up with the finished item. And then for accessories, so things like scarves, you would do the big seam. Hats, you would hand knit the crown of the hats and seam them together. So that's the job of a finisher. So I did that for 2 years, and then I got trained to use the knitting machine. So ever since then, I've been doing both knitting and finishing. And probably about 2 to 3 years ago, I started getting more involved with my hand knitting, started trying out different patterns. I always kind of tried to play it safe, I think, by choosing things that I knew I could knit that weren't too adventurous. But then I think with that, you can maybe get stuck in a rut. So one of the things I did was I started signing up as a test knitter for a couple of knitting publications, like Making Stories magazine. I think for most of those issues, I've done test knits on socks. I've never done a test knit for anything like a jumper or cardigan or sort of a garment, purely because I am a slow hand knitter, and I would be worried that I wouldn't be able to finish the test knit in the time that you're given, just because of other commitments here on the croft and with my own work. But things like socks are quite doable, and I think doing test knits, it pushes you a little bit to try different things that you might not normally choose to knit for yourself. So certainly I feel that I've grown as a knitter over the last 2 to 3 years. I wouldn't say I'm an expert knitter or particularly advanced or anything like that, but now I have a bit more confidence to try things that a few years ago I would have been scared to try. Well, I hope that's answered the questions. If you have any more questions, please feel free to put them in the comments below, and I'll try and get those answered in my next video. But I wish you all a very happy February. For those of you under winter conditions, keep safe and keep warm, and let's hope that spring isn't too far away. Bye bye.